So a central view of life that stems from this teaching is a view that life is a happening. Essentially, we could say a happening according to God's will, or a happening according to life. God in this context doesn't mean the God of religions, but rather God just being a word for source, energy, actually whatever you would like to call it. It just means that life comes out of something, has to have a source, but not even necessarily in the logical causal way. I'd prefer to think of life having, or source having turned into life. And then life happens, and we're part and parcel of the happening of life. And this concept can really start to help us interfere with the deeply ingrained belief that life is my doing, life is the other's doing, instead of seeing it as a happening. Now, life as a happening means it's actually much more impersonal than the way we take it when we see it as my doing and your doing. Everything is a happening. Speaking happens. Thinking happens. Movements happen. Impulses arise. They happen. And so if we start taking interest in what is it that drives me in life, what moves me, and we'll find that A leads to B, leads to C, leads to D. That the words are a consequence of a circumstance that we find ourselves in. And in between the words there might be a thought that arises, which is a consequence of the circumstance. So the thought happens, not my doing. So this is essentially a critical investigation, a critical perspective that is fundamental to the setting in of peace of mind. Because when we look at peace of mind, it's the absence of suffering. And when we look at what is this suffering, it's a thought process, an attitude to what's happening that is based on the belief that I am the doer, I am the creator. The other is the doer, the other is the creator. And so from that point of view, all of the suffering of guilt and blame and pride, of worry about what might happen and how I can prevent it from happening, and expectation based also on the idea that somehow I can make life turn out a certain way and that I need it to turn out a certain way. So if peace of mind is the absence of suffering, and suffering is based on this assumption of doership, personal doership, starting to see life as a happening changes everything. And if we don't start seeing life as a happening, then the alternative is the deeply ingrained attitude that's currently in place of personal doership, and then suffering has to keep arising. So the question is it accurate to see life as my doing and the other's doing? Understanding that this notion of personal doership refers not to life happening, doesn't refer to whether the human being functions. It refers to interpretation of why the functioning is happening. Either an interpretation that says, I am an independent entity in control of everything that happens through me, an independent entity that has the capacity to think and to act in a way that is uninfluenced by anything else. That's the idea that is set in place. Independent really means insulated and in complete control of everything that I think, feel, say, and do. And if we look at the fact that we've been conditioned by life, we've been shaped by life, both on a biological and the hardware, so the genetic structure, and the conditioning. So we've never been insulated from life. So this notion that I am an insulated entity that makes decisions and acts as a result of independence really can't hold water if we see the more fundamental reason of why we function a particular way. So that's why it's called an error, a misunderstanding, not seeing things clearly. So life is a happening. Means that what happens through me is not my doing, but an inevitability. That life will happen as it's destined to happen. So when we start seeing the inner movements as a happening, then a distance that wasn't there before kicks in. So thoughts happening, thoughts arising, feelings arising in a body-mind organism, arising in a biological entity, a biological instrument. One of my favorite reactions to unfortunate things, not really, maybe not the really unfortunate things, I might not say that, but if someone, breaks something of mine, and they apologize, like these things happen. Yeah? It's true, they do. And it's very much linked to this understanding. These things happen stems from an understanding that, yes, life happens and life is a flow of pleasure and pain. That's all that the happening of life will ever be on a flow of life level. And the suffering is on another level, meaning our attitude to the flow of life. So we can either have an attitude that this was a happening, the pain, the pleasure was a happening, or we can have an attitude to the flow of life that says, this was your doing, this was my doing, I should have and I could have done it differently, and what you did that you could have, should have done differently, delivered pain to me or someone I love, and therefore I hate you. Or what I did that I could have and should have done differently, that delivered pain to myself or to someone I love or to a stranger, was my doing, and because it delivered pain, which we see as an attack on who we are, then we hate ourselves. So the real freedom is when you wake up in the morning and the things from the past are irrelevant. They happened. Doesn't mean we might not remember them if we're prompted. But there isn't any bitterness carried over. There isn't any uncomfortableness carried over because of what happened in the past. Because it's been processed. It can get processed. What happens in the present, just as what happened in the past, can be processed instantaneously if it's deeply seen as the unfolding of life, functioning as life functions, which means any range of circumstance can happen. Extremes of pleasure and pain. All of that is part of the nature of life, and the quicker that we can acknowledge that, the more aligned we can be with each moment. Because each moment is only ever going to be circumstance, either pleasure or pain, sometimes extreme. If we understand that life is pleasure or pain, then that's a beginning to being aligned and not in resistance to life. The second very important part is that there needs to be a connection to that which is the core of the human being, the core of ourself, where we can retreat to, take refuge in, rest in, and know that this circumstance isn't actually an attack on the core of who I am. So without that capacity or that movement, that connection to rest in a part of ourself that confirms that the flow of life isn't an attack on who we are. Without that connection, then this is theoretical at best, conceptual only, and the flow of life will continue to be pleasure and pain, and if that place within us hasn't been found, then it means that we have to continue to experience pleasure and pain through our self-image. Self-image is the idea we have of ourself that is limited. It's limited because the core of the human being hasn't been realized, hasn't been recognized. And when that happens, it means we can't have a complete knowing of ourselves. So we have a partial understanding of what the human being is. And that partial understanding includes the experience that pleasure and pain is what adds to me and what subtracts from me. So that becomes part of the idea of who we are, part of the partial understanding of who we are. And then life is always experienced as an attack or an addition to who I am. So this dropping into our being, this finding this other gear which is available in life. It's like a car that comes with 2 gears, and maybe we've never found how to get the car into the 2nd gear. Maybe we don't even know that it has 2 gears, and so we drive around in 1 gear. And finding that there is this 2nd gear is very important. And one of the ways of dropping into this place, this 2nd gear, is by becoming present with the experience as an experience. Which means that we come to know that we don't need to comment on the experience in order to know it as an experience. We need to hear some pointers. For example, that in order to be present with the experience, the thinking about the experience, which gets in the way of being present with the experience, really needs to fall into the background or stop. And so, in a way, this could be the effort that is spoken about in non-dual teachings. And when I say effort, the teachings will sometimes say you don't need to do anything. There isn't anywhere to go. That's one half of the equation. That's one half of the movement. And that's a pointer in case we find ourselves consistently trying to get somewhere, which means the thinking is always operating. And so then a teaching will say, look, you've got it all wrong. Your peace, yourself is right here. And there's thinking in the way, so stop thinking. You have to think your way out of this problem. And then on the other hand, it says, there are lifetimes of vasanas and samskaras that are in the system. And those vasanas and samskaras don't just magically dissolve. They require a process of interested effort. And so becoming present with the present moment when we're continually being enticed to think can sometimes require dedication. It can require a dedication to keep returning to presence. It can require a dedication to interfere with the habits that have been set in place. But hopefully it's not a dedication or an effort from the place of personal doership and attachment to outcomes. It may well start off like that. And that's when the teachings will come in and say, look, making effort is problematic because you think you need to get somewhere. You think you need to get something that you don't have. That will be the response when the effort is being made from the thinking mind. Whereas if the effort starts happening automatically because we start seeing things as they are, then it's not an effort because of a should and a shouldn't. That is conceptual, that someone has told me you should keep meditating, you should keep coming back to presence. But rather an effort that happens because we hear a description, not a should or a shouldn't, just a description that says, in order to find this other gear that we can rest in, this other gear of being connected to ourself that is untouched by circumstance, whenever possible, when the thinking mind is active, remember to come back to the experience, consciously be aware of experience as experience, which means there's a new job in that moment. And the job is not of thinking about the past or the future, but rather of appreciating the present moment experience as an experience, which requires no commentary, no thinking. It just requires awareness to be aware of what is. And not so much aware of the mundaneness of a wall or a door. This is not suggesting that our attention land on the bookshelf and just appreciate the bookshelf for its design, but rather with some prompting we might start relating to life as an ever-changing momentary experience. A set of images arising within consciousness. Something far more profound than just matter that has been placed a certain way by humans, but rather recognizing that there is a multi-sensory experience arising within a consciousness. That without consciousness present, without awareness present, the moment couldn't exist in the way that it is. There needs to be awareness of what is. So with that understanding, plus the understanding that each moment is always changing in flux, there is movement, which is change. Objects come in and leave, sound objects arise and fall away. So with the realization that the present moment experience is always changing, it is never a static thing, even if the objects appear to be stationary, there is always subtle movement. That movement, that experience, requires awareness to be present in order for the experience to be known, which then means that the objects that are perceived, the experience that is there, is not separate from awareness. If the experience is interdependent on awareness, it means the whole experience arises within and not separate from awareness. So, coming back to this place of being present with the experience as an experience is one of the movements that can shift us out of the gear of the thinking mind into a place of knowing the human and the life experience more fully. In this movement, we can start to see what it means by life is a happening. The experience is happening. And the sounds, the visual images, the smells, the tastes, none of that is created by us, and yet there is an awareness of it. Very much like the awareness of a movie, not created but by us, and yet recognized. And this awareness that is the fundament of experience is ever present. It is an aspect that has to be there whenever daily life is present. We could say that that is the constant, whereas the experience is always changing. The objects of experience are always changing. And we've tended to become interested in that which is changing. We're interested in the body, which is part of the experience. And it's changing. That which is unchanging, that which is ever present, has been exactly that, unchanging and ever present, and there hasn't been an interest in that. Beingness is synonymous with or interconnected with this awareness, the sense of being. The faculty of awareness are two aspects of consciousness, two aspects of the core of the human being. That's why we're called a human being. And this beingness, this existence, the sense of existence, the isness, is also ever present and unchanging. So what can be helpful in this search is, especially if we're interested in truth, which is not something that I necessarily encourage people to become too interested in, because on the one hand I'll say there is no truth that we can know. And yet there is something that we could say is relatively more true than something else. That which is changing is unreal. It can be a spiritual concept or a logic concept that can be very useful. That which is changing is not real. Because the real is real, so it's always there. Before you ask your question, I'll say this is not meant to be a statement of truth. It's a concept to help us with something. So I don't mean that this concept is the truth, that which is changing is not real.
Makes my question a little more difficult. But if it's not the truth, then how is one to relate to this statement as well, what you just said?
As a concept.
Yeah, how? Can you elaborate on that a little? Because either we accept that as true for now at least, or...
Mm-hmm. So I would say to accept it as a useful concept to follow in order to become aware of something that, I'll describe it rather, not, because you asked how can we use this concept. And the concept is put out there because it can be useful. But rather, I'll describe it as a concept that, if contemplated, if considered, can lead to a recognition of a part of the human being that was previously unrecognized. So,
but it requires us to assume that it's true for us to be useful, isn't it?
well, on the basis, if I were to talk about anything relative, and I were to say, if you hold a match under a piece of paper, the paper is going to burn. Or if I say, if you drill a hole in the wall and then put a certain plug into that hole, and the hole has to be the right size and the plug has to be the right size, then you can put a screw in it and hang a picture. It's relatively accurate. So we could say you can trust that, right? But from another perspective, these statements about the relative are not going to hold true. Does that make sense?
How about an equation, like a mathematical equation? It doesn't change, like let's say a complex mathematical relationship. So that's the objects which are described by that relationship might change, they might die, they have an age.
Mm-hmm.
But the relationship itself, the logical relationship, it's seemingly constant. It doesn't change.
Right. And so what I mean is, if you go down to another level of existence, that mathematical concept no longer has a relevance. So if you take one of the Newton's concepts,
2 plus 2 equals 4.
Exactly. So if you take 2 plus 2 equals 4, and you go down to a level of existence where there aren't, where 1, 2, 3, 4 is no longer a relevant concept, then the equation no longer holds true. So if you go into a realm of existence where time and space don't present, where objects don't present, then the concept of 2 plus 2 equals 4 doesn't make sense. So time, there is a concept of time, but in a certain level of existence, it doesn't hold true anymore. So we can say that that concept is relatively true when applied on the level that it applies to. So if someone was to come in and look at any concept, they can find a situation where that concept doesn't hold true. So a good example is if you take a mechanical physics concept and then go into the quantum realm, it doesn't hold true anymore. And that doesn't mean that the mechanical physics concept is not useful. So you can relate to the mechanical physics concept and trust that it is accurate for practical purposes. But we can't argue that it is truth. Right? And so that's why if someone gets into the argument about is it absolute truth, I say that's actually irrelevant to know whether it's absolute truth. All you need to know about is if it is useful for practical purposes. And so the concept that says that which is changing is unreal that which is changing is real can be a useful concept to guide our thinking, guide our attention, to recognize something that might not have been recognized before. Ironically, that's especially effective when someone is seeking truth. To hear that that which is changing is unreal, and that which is not changing or ever present is real or truth. So the irony is someone who's seeking truth will relate to a concept that is relative as truth, which it isn't, and it can help them recognize something that is described as truth or real, which it isn't. And it doesn't matter that those incorrect relationships to the concept have happened, because the concept has been presented and is useful at delivering a certain outcome. So awareness is ever present. In order for life experience to be here, we know that awareness of it needs to be present. So you can't ever have a life experience without awareness. Once again, it's a relative concept.
Yeah, I was just feeling that as you were saying it, and it's quite remarkable that they're strung together in such a elegant way, like even they're not true, and like they're still consistent. The lies are sort of consistent. It's very cool.
Yeah,
it's
well,
quite remarkable.
So because something is not truth, doesn't mean it's a lie.
Sorry,
it means it's a relative concept.
Yeah, but the fact that it's all strung together, like a lot of relative, it's quite amazing.
Yeah. So this nuance or this point here about whether something is truth is interesting at a certain point, because we need to start realizing how we relate to concepts, to descriptions as truth, when in fact they too are changing, they too are relative. But that becomes interesting at a certain point of the journey. It becomes useful at a certain point in the journey. Actually, for a long time in the journey, it's, you could say, more helpful if we take concepts as truth. Meaning, not if we take it, if we're designed to relate to a concept as truth, then it can be more effective at bringing about change. And eventually, we need to go past taking any concept as truth, even the one that we come up with as a result of our experience. And so we put a concept onto an experience, our experience, and we have to realize even that concept is a concept about our experience. So whatever, any mystic has written in a book is a concept, not the truth. And so, often in spirituality, we hear a teaching saying one thing and then we say, oh, but, so-and-so said this. And that's in direct contradiction to what you're saying. And I say the fundamental error is you're taking what is written here as truth. It's a very useful concept. Both of them are very useful concepts. And if you go into a teaching, a broad enough teaching, you'll find that there are what seem to be contradictions in a teaching. On the one hand, it'll say this, and then on the other hand, it'll say something that seems to contradict it. And once we realize that each statement is relatively true from a certain perspective and is there to address a certain obstacle, a certain misunderstanding. And so another misunderstanding requires another concept which might be in opposition to an earlier used concept. So that's why in this teaching we at some point say, let's keep it practical. What is it that we're really looking for? Because if we don't keep it practical, the high probability is that we would have and will have got caught up in a whole lot of concepts, believing them as truth, and starting to experience life through a lens of concepts that we've taken to be true. A whole lot of spiritual concepts. Instead of coming back to our own experience and keeping it practical, and that practical approach will have the capacity to snap us out of certain beliefs that have been set in place as part of the spiritual process. Belief in God, for example. Certain concepts about God. So come to your experience and find God in your experience. And then you can know God, the God that you know. And the more precise we are at describing our experience for ourselves, the more clear we can become on what actually is, and let go of descriptions that we've picked up about a God. When it comes to peace of mind, we're saying what we're really looking for is peace of mind. And peace of mind is the absence of suffering. And so that suffering is something you can become present with. And you can say, is it true that my unhappiness arises in the form of various forms of suffering? Guilt, blame, pride, worry, and expectation. Is it true that what I'm looking for may just be the absence of that? And so if that's the case, it's a concept that says what we're looking for is peace of mind, but it's a concept that we can start verifying for ourselves based on our own experience. So are there any topics that people want to speak about?
So I think I've heard you say these things like maybe at least 1,000 times, and yet there are days when it just like blows my mind. Yeah.
Good. Mind-blowing is good. Do you want to share something, Anil? Because I know that you, I guess, how can I say it? From the interactions that we've had, you tend to approach this in a different way to the more mystical teachings. And that's not to say that when I talk about top-down versus bottom-up teachings, if I talk about the mystical Advaita teachings versus the practical Advaita teachings, I hope no one hears a comparison or a criticism. Any teaching to me is a methodology. And if someone asks, why does a teaching say this? There's a reason for it. So we can give a reason why a teaching says what it says. And so there's no criticism of different teachings. They're all seen as teachings. But I know that you tend to approach it from a bottom-up perspective. So I'd be interested in a comment or a question, if you have one.
Just really a comment. I really come here just to hang out with you. It's a pleasure being in your company. And from everything that I've heard or read, it appears that I just need to hang until it comes upon me, and in the meantime have a glass of wine.
Good one, yes.
Just hope it happens. But it is it's very thought-provoking at times, and sometimes it's very just simply emotionally inspiring. So.
But what are you, when you say hope it happens, what are you talking about? What's meant to happen? That
on a breath by breath basis, I believe that my wife's not responsible for annoying me.
Yeah. Okay, good. You mean, so can I rephrase it? You mean that the happening that we're hoping for, in a sense, and so hopefully we can see why hoping can in itself be part of the problem. But I also appreciate that we have to use words, and so it's more about the intention behind the word. So there's a recognition that in daily living, when pain arises, there is a resistance to that. And the resistance often is in the form of blame, let's say, where the attitude towards the other is of personal doership. And so you're saying it would be much more optimal if I could live life where in the moment when pain is delivered, and so the example you use, which is very pertinent because life is interhuman relationship, is where in relationship, when the other delivers pain, it is related to in an impersonal way. It's related to in a way where the suffering doesn't arise. And that to me is very practical. That looking at what's currently life for Anil, and understanding intellectually that what's spoken about is a life experience that on the flow of life level is going to remain more or less the same. You will wake up in the morning and do the same things and have more or less the same life situation, and find that it's possible for that fairly constant or consistent life experience, life circumstance, to be related to with less of the guilt, blame, pride, worry, and expectation.
The screw up is I can't do anything about it. In fact, as you pointed out, if I try too hard, that's probably the problem itself.
Yes.
So I think a glass of wine works great.
Yeah. Yes. And so still saying that we can't do anything, what it means is we can't do anything as a separate independent doer. But then again, we see that there never has been a separate independent doer. There's only been the particular thinking that assumes there to be a separate independent doer. So if I were to ask you, so how could this change come about? What would the mechanics of the change happening be?
I think just hanging out with, listening to what you have to say, having a glass of wine. Wayne's coming over, by the way, to Bombay, so
Yes.
spend some time with him. Carl Renz comes quite often.
Yes.
Those are interesting, so hopefully grace comes upon me, and whatever this is that's going on may be part of the process.
Sure, but if we look at it once again on a really practical level, hanging out with us is useful because certain information, certain new conditioning is delivered, and that new conditioning has the potential to change the up-to-date conditioning.
This is the hope.
Yeah, yeah, that's it.
When Ramana used to say the entire life is predetermined.
Just for the recording, it'd be good. I can hear your voice, but
All right.
just for the
So Ramana used to say the entire life of anyone is predetermined.
Mm-hmm.
So much so, somebody asked him that whether I'll have a coffee or a tea, or which door I'll come in and which door I'll, kind of walk out. Is that also predetermined? And he was very emphatic. He said, yeah.
Yes.
So he basically meant that again, the non-doership, and
Mm-hmm.
it's happening and it's already kind of predetermined.
Precisely, yeah. And this teaching says that life is a creation, that life is a story according to God's will. It will unfold in each moment exactly as it's determined to unfold. That a leaf will fall off a tree at exactly the moment it is destined to fall off, and the path that the leaf travels to the ground is the only path that that leaf can take. And we can leave it at that, a mystical explanation, which people can sort of either resonate or believe, and just believing it can be useful. But I think that we need to be able to come to an understanding of why is it that life is predetermined? How can we say life is predetermined? Because if we just believe life is predetermined, it means the understanding hasn't gone deep enough. It's like if we really need to see what is meant by life is predetermined, and then we'll know that life is predetermined for ourselves. And so there are either certain insights and experiential shifts that can give us, it's not really give us a perspective that sees it differently and sees, that's what's meant by it's a happening, it's predetermined, it's a creation, not my doing. So we can experientially see it that way, or we can do various mind experiments, thought experiments, that show us that whatever happens in this moment is not insulated from things that happened in the previous moment, and that things that happen in the previous moment are not insulated from things that happened in the moment before, that essentially everything is completely interconnected and all physics. So there's two different ways, or probably more ways of seeing the predetermined aspect of life. We can see it from a non-linear perspective, see that the momentary experience is here and I didn't create it. So it doesn't require any linear knowledge. It just needs us to become present with experience in this present moment. And from that perspective, we see speaking is happening. And where are the words coming from? When we're really present with the present moment, which means, in a way, no thoughts of cause and effect, just presence with what is, then what is words arising, thoughts arising, actions happening, and there's no doer of that. From the perspective of complete presence with the experience as an experience arising in this moment. And so that means from the perspective of the witness, the moment was predetermined to be like this. Meaning I didn't create it, so it's like when you're watching a movie, you know that it was predetermined for the movie to arise the way it arose. Now, in a movie, we know it was produced previously. So the predetermined perspective of life when we're present with it as an experience doesn't even necessarily imply produced previously a long time ago, like a movie, is produced hours, months, weeks, years before. But from the perspective of being completely present with the experience, we know it must have been created, and it wasn't created by me. So from the perspective of the witness, you say it was predetermined to be this way. And the pre doesn't mean it can be simultaneously. So we can even drop the pre if we like and just say it's determined to be this way. Another word that I like is it was inevitable. Because Source presented it this way. Source became this, it didn't become something else. So this is inevitable. We could say theoretically, Source is infinite, so it could have theoretically been anything. But the infinite collapses into one actuality, and that actuality is what is. So then we say, what is was determined by who knows the real factors. But once it's experienced, you might as well relate to it, or you can relate to it, as determined. Essentially, attitudinally and psychologically, it cuts off any thoughts that say, I could have and should have created the experience differently. From a linear perspective, because if we can't see this from a pure presence, which sometimes requires certain assumptions about how life is unfolding, to fall away, like assumptions of cause and effect, which doesn't mean when those fall away, it doesn't mean we don't hold them as potential. It just means we don't hold them as absolute. The rules of cause and effect and time and space. But if those ideas haven't been weakened enough such that we just hold them as possibilities rather than as absolute, we can still come to see a predetermined that life is predetermined by following rules of cause and effect that we take to be absolute. And the best example that I can think of, two examples, is a bomb explodes and the impulse, the energy when at the start is the cause, in a sense, you can say, the source of all of the subsequent movement that happens. So there's an explosion and all the bits start moving, and how one of the pieces of the bomb moves is determined by physics. And when it bumps into another piece and then they move off, all of that is, it's impersonal. And it had to happen that way based on the environment and the initial impulse, the initial burst of energy. So a bomb is a bit morbid, really. So we can look at a pool table, a billiard table, and when the white ball is hit, that initial burst of energy then moves everything into motion. So the white ball then hits the red balls in a triangle, and there's this whole set of movement, which is the expenditure of the initial burst of energy, and which balls hit which balls is not up to the balls to decide. We can see it's all impersonal movements, but following rules of the closed system. And so in this case, rules of physics. And so if a ball hits the cushion at a certain speed at a certain angle, it has to bounce off at a predetermined angle. And if another ball has hit the cushion at a different place, at a certain speed and at a certain angle, it has to bounce off at a certain angle. And so that means it was destined, if those balls hit, it was destined for them to hit based on the initial impulse. And the fact that this is a closed system following certain rules. And we don't even need to know what the rules are to just know if there are a set of constant rules, then, and even if the rules aren't constant, even if the rules are changing, all we need to know is that everything is happening according to the rules. And so what happens is a result of rules, and it was always destined to happen that way. So if you had a simulator, a computer that can simulate what is going to happen on the pool table, because it has all the information, and it's set at 10 times speed, let's say, that if a sensor senses the force at which the white ball is hit and the angle at which it's hit, and delivers that information into the computer at the time of the white ball being hit, and simulate is hit, and it all happens at 10 times speed, there'll be a picture of what the balls will look like when the energy has expended itself. And the picture that the computer comes up with is magically going to be exactly where all of the balls end up on the table, which means that the end result was predetermined. Because how could the computer know ahead of time what the end result is going to be if it's not predetermined, if it's not controlled by a set of rules? So that means then our understanding needs to be able to see all of the variables in life and understand them to be part of mechanics, which can be hard for us at first because we don't understand thinking, for example, as mechanics. Our idea is, no, that's my thought, rather than seeing it as a thought arising in a very complex instrument that in itself is governed by the laws of physics. So Stephen Hawking has made the comment, which I loved when I heard it, and it just confirmed. His comment was, thinking is simply physics. Thinking is simply electromagnetics in a very complex neural network. If you want to simplify it down, it's like water running through pipes, and the flow of the water through the pipes is determined by physics. Different sort of physics to the electromagnetics in the brain, but in principle the same. So the thought that happens in this moment is actually a result of everything that has come before. So we could say the initial impulse is what science calls the Big Bang. What mystical explanation would be consciousness at rest, pure potentiality, at some point has to explode into manifestation, has to actualize. So pure infinity or infinite potential actualizes as one expression of potentiality. Anyway, I went into an explanation of how we can start to see everything as predetermined, but your comment was about how Ramana is emphatic about the fact that everything is predetermined. And it's really, so I was going to say, did you want to follow up on that? But before I do, there's a reason why the emphasis on predetermination is there. It's not really there in order for us to have a big philosophical debate about whether things are predetermined or not. It's not there because he says that is what is the truth and that's what needs to be recognized. It's there as a concept, you could say, as an explanation that has the capacity, if recognized or if believed, to interfere with the thinking mind that is based on the idea that I'm the doer as a separate independent entity and the other is the doer, and the notion that everything is happening as a result of a very impersonal movement is the complete opposite of the basis of guilt and blame and pride, which are a huge part of our false idea of who we are. And so seeing everything as predetermined is there not because that's some very important truth, but rather because it's an accurate description of things that can cut off the belief in doership.
So, in India, I think even worldwide, people go to astrologers and they seem to be telling the future. Then with that logic, it's possible that some people could be accurate because they probably have figured out the rules.
That's
in
right.
some way.
Yeah.
Some rules based on whatever, planetary positions or whatever.
And whether they're accurate or not, both you and I won't ever know until the time of the prediction comes. And even they won't know until, so you have, let's say, Nostradamus, made many accurate predictions and many predictions that didn't come true. So it seems like some people get given a gift, but that gift is not something infallible. And it's, as you say, is that as part of someone's genes and up-to-date conditioning, they've been given an understanding of a science, let's say, of astrology, which really means understanding the correlation of one thing with the other. And so the correlation really is the planets at a particular point in time, usually the time of birth, and that can get pictorially represented in a chart. And so then given the rules, given that they know the rules and the correlations, because it's part of the science of astrology, they can then say, well, that correlates with this, which means this, which is the prediction. And it's no different to a scientist that has come to understand the rules of movement, let's say, and he can get given, or even an engineer that has come to understand the rules of various physics rules, and he can say that bridge is going to fall if you build it like that. It's a prediction. That bridge is going to be able to withhold this many cars on it before it falls. It's a prediction according to understanding the rules.
Okay. Other thing is that a lot of people in this path do get siddhis,
Mm-hmm.
Siddhis means they get some magical powers, like manifestation of things. There's some magician in UK who can walk on water. He walked on River Thames. I'm forgetting his name. Anyway, so I mean, how do they do it? I mean, do they have something different, some different bodies? Or,
Well, I would differentiate between a magician and someone with city powers, if the city powers exist. I've read about the city powers. To be honest, I have to have a skeptical aspect, which is not actually skeptical, but it's a critical thinking attribute that says, from my experience, I don't know if cities actually get given to people, but let's assume that the accounts that we hear of are accurate. And I see no reason why life can't give certain gifts to certain people. And so the city powers would be a gift, let's say. Some people might tell you that in practice it's a curse, but let's assume it isn't referred to as a curse by them, and so it's just some people get certain attributes and other people don't. Everyone has different attributes. So I would say the city powers are just an attribute given to some people by creation, by source. A magician walking on water can be different to a city power because they can have various illusions in place, or versus some contraptions that allow them to do things, and we can't see the contraption that allows that to happen, and it can create a certain illusion. So if the magician is actually someone with a city power, then okay, then it's not based on typical magician stuff.
No, I'm not talking about typical. So this person is Dynamo. I don't know whether you heard of Dynamo. He's
Yes, I have. Yeah.
So he has some powers, like appearing in two places at the same time and many things. So those are not magic. They're actually some powers he's probably been born with, or life has.
Yes. So it's best not to call him a magician, because the word magician usually applies to people that use optical tricks. Yeah. So we could call him a yogi with city powers.
Yeah.
But even we still need to question the truth of those powers. Not to deny them, but to hold a healthy skepticism. Just because we know that we are prone to, what's the word? The brain tends to be very
Impressed by.
yeah, but I lose the word. Never mind, that's not important. Impressionable.
Yeah.
The brain is impressionable. So if the setting is correct, we may well see things that are not happening. But then the skepticism can go too far as well and get in the way of seeing things clearly. Because there's no reason to me why, if life is a manifestation of source, and source happens to be, and life is an imagination in the mind of God, for example, that it appears like the imagination is following rules of causality, cause and effect, time and space. So it means the creation has been created to, at least up to this point, by and large, follow rules of cause and effect. But if it is that sort of creation, a creation in the mind of God, at any moment an oak tree could appear in front of me with no causal reason. And if that happened, it would mean that the manifestation in that moment has stopped following particular rules, which are rules that it has put in place. So if the creation put the rules in place. There's no reason why for a particular moment or from a certain point in time that the rules are different. If apples started floating past us, we really would need to question the nature of reality as we have come to believe it. So on the one hand, I would be surprised because this manifestation is a manifestation that seems to be impeccably following rules of cause and effect, which is why when we talk about siddhi powers, that doesn't, it still, you could say, follows rules of cause and effect if we introduce the notion that they have been given a gift. So then that is the cause of that effect. So on the one hand, I would be surprised if an oak tree just appeared in front of me, or if an apple floated past. And on the other hand, I wouldn't be at all surprised. And I mean that sincerely. Because life is an experience, and we've all, well, not necessarily all, we've had dreams, which is an experience in which the rules of daily life don't always apply.
Yeah, physical laws don't apply.
So there's, in my mind, there isn't a reason why these sort of things couldn't happen, although it would be surprising to some extent, because this seems to be a manifestation of that is following laws of cause and effect, at least for now. One of the quotes that Ramesh liked from Buddha was, events happen, deeds are done, consequences happen, but there is no individual doer thereof. That's a quote attributed to Buddha. There are some people that say he never said that. But there are some references that say it's a quote from Buddha. Stephen Hawking, so go to science, asked the question, or had an essay, and the essay was titled, "Is Life Predetermined?" ? That was the title of the essay. And the first sentence of the essay is, "Yes, it is. Full stop. However, knowing that life is predetermined doesn't allow us to know what is predetermined. Doesn't allow us to know what will come next." And so when science comes to a conclusion that mystics have come to, but using a different method of conclusion, it's actually very encouraging. That's not to say that the mystics somehow are better than science. What it says is that if we start seeing life a certain way, and then one of the preeminent physicists of our time concludes something that we intuitively have come to know, and the physicist concluded it not through intuition, but through calculation, then it says, well, this is something that I can rely on even more deeply than I might have been relying on it before. And once again, what's the significance of seeing life as predetermined? The significance is not in order to be able to have a debate or a philosophical conversation, but rather the implication that follows from that. And the implication is that if I receive pain in this moment, we can start to see that that is part of the story of life. It's impersonal. The person that delivered the pain is simply the instrument through which life was, or the instrument that life was using to deliver the pain that was destined a long, long time ago, you could say. So then this attitude of seeing the other as the enemy can fall away. So it was my destiny in this moment to experience pain, and the destiny of the other to deliver it to me. And the same attitude towards pleasure. Why pleasure can be we can have suffering even when pleasure is there, because our attachment to outcomes, the belief that my happiness is to be found in pleasure, 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 can then we can be enjoying the pleasure, and then the thinking mind kicks in and says, well, what will happen if this pleasure ends? What will I do then? And so then that thinking, which is a layer of suffering, gets in the way of us fully enjoying the pleasure. So the unfortunateness about this thinking mind, when it's pleasure, is not only does it kick in when there is pain, but it's also there when there is pleasure, and it tends to be a background to all of life. It's an attitude that pervades all of life, an attitude of misunderstanding of what we really are, and therefore the cause of an uncomfortableness, a general uncomfortableness with oneself because of not knowing ourself truly, that is there irrespective of what's happening in the circumstance. And the great freedom is when that attitude collapses and there is a knowing of ourself at a deeper level, where we see everything that is happening through me as a result of source functioning through me, which really means that we remain connected to source all the time, knowing that the speaking is source functioning through me, that the movement of the hand is source functioning through me. That means that our connection to source remains unbroken. And so with that unbroken connection to source, what we find is that there is peace regardless of the circumstance. The complete opposite, which was underlying or all-pervading sense of uncomfortableness regardless of the circumstance. And if we can come to see the uncomfortableness when it's there as part of the predetermined story of life, because even our attitude to the flow of life is part of what's predetermined, then there can be a relaxation. It's destined for there to be pain in the moment and destined for there to be suffering. And if that attitude kicks in, there's a degree of peace with the pain and with the suffering. Just like if the attitude of non-doership kicked in totally, there would still be the pain, but a peace with the pain, a peace with the pleasure. If the suffering is there and that attitude kicks in, then there's a peace with the pain and the suffering.
And when you say connection with the source, it's this heart center.
In my experience, yes, the connection to source. And so even if a critical thinker is hearing what I'm saying, they'll say, what's this source that you're connected to? And they're right, in a way. We don't know any source. We only know theoretically that there must be a source of this. And the explanation here is that not even source in a causal sense, but source has turned into this. So it's not separate from this. Source has turned into this. But this connection to source really means a connection to ourself, the part of ourself that presents the most basic part of ourself, let's say our being. And when we, I guess not think, but almost visualize a connection to source, while grounded in our being, there is a resonance, you could say. There is a sense that this is true, that I am not separate, but connected. Now, there's no doubt that theoretically we are connected to life, we are not separate from life. But the source that we can sense when we ground into our being is a source that transcends physical life. But it's a sense, it's an intuition. So even holding that absolutely is an error. What we can know undeniably is my own sense of existence, right? So that's not that's not source, that's, well, if we say that that comes from source, then we'd say, well, if I know my being, I know source in manifest form. But if I know source in manifest form, can I say that I am connected to source as something different from manifest form? Technically, like if we're really accurate, no, we can't say it with complete absoluteness. But if we rest there, we start getting, there is a sense of it. And so understanding that, a sense means, oh, I'm going to run with this perspective. That's the perspective that makes sense to me. But I'm not going to be able to stand up and have an argument with someone and say it's absolute. And I'd say it's not even, actually, it's not important. At the end of the day, I say, what is important is that if I can ground into my own being, even if I take the stance that the beingness is a result of the body and the body-mind organism, which I know is not separate from life, the physical life, it's spawned from life. Even if I say that that being is the being of just a body, who cares? Because it delivers, it has in it that being, that is the being of the body, if that's the case, the body and mind. It delivers the peace in daily living by resting there, by no longer having the beliefs that were there previously. So if someone said to me, what would the most practical explanation be as to why suffering has come to an end? I'd say, well, the body was born, the body-brain, the body-mind organism was born in, if we're keeping it practical, you say an objective world, a real world. The body and the mind is real, and it grew in such a way that for a period of time it was relating to life, meaning its attitude to life was one of creating suffering, of suffering arising. And as a result of a process of observation, a process of contemplation, a process of investigation, where certain insights and realizations happened, the habits of relating to life a particular way changed. They fell away. And the body, then the body-brain, the body-mind, found that there was a potential of being in life where the attitude to life wasn't an attitude of suffering. And that process made it very clear that it is, in practical terms, the guilt, the blame, the pride, the worry, expectation that is the problem. And certain relative explanations, certain concepts that said it doesn't make sense for this reason and that reason, came into life, and that is what dissolved the belief systems that created that attitude of suffering. And even if at some point we say, I don't even know if all of those teachings are absolutely true, it's irrelevant, because what they did was undermine the habit that was there before. And so now, even if I say I don't know if they were true, it's the body-mind organism now knows that it is optimal, regardless of what's true or what's not true, not to relate to the actions of the other with a certain attitude. Because the body-mind now knows that if you do relate to the actions of the other with a certain attitude, it just creates an extra layer of uncomfortableness. So then I say, I don't care what's true. The most practical explanation is that the habits have changed to be able to relate to life in what you could say is a more optimal way. Hello. You've come in with a mission.
To undo the doer.
Go away then. Where's the microphone? Oh, I thought you. Okay, no. So the one that wants to undo the doer is the doer. But that's okay. We were saying before, we can't take language too absolutely, because it's about the intention behind the language. So we put ourselves into certain environments, and the doer can become undone by the impersonal movements in that environment.
Einstein had once said that this whole world is an illusion, but it's a persistent illusion.
Mm-hmm.
It is an illusion, but it's a very persistent illusion.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think he was enlightened, or did he actually understand Advaita that he said something of this kind?
Who said that?
Einstein. Albert Einstein.
Oh, I have little doubt that he was probably one of the more enlightened people in the world, in world history, because not only did he take the non-causal side of things, but he also acknowledged the existence of the causal. And he was a critical thinker. If someone who is a critical thinker, which means really understands the process of thinking, understands the limitations of thoughts, so that means that their thinking is a healthy form of thinking, then you see reality, not actually, you don't see reality, but you see things more clearly when you have the ability of critical thinking. And so we can see that he was connected to not only a linear logic, because he put so much emphasis on creativity and imagination. And that's a sign that there has been a breakaway from just logic, linear logic thinking. So critical thinking is not just linear logical thinking. So yes, I think, and furthermore, the equation E equals mc squared came to him, and he said it came to him from outside. Now, that implies that his way of being was one of being very open, and that's why he, I think, put so much emphasis on creativity and imagination. which is an aspect that can only happen if there is an openness, a receptivity.
Hi.
Hello.
I also want to just say that there are times when there is no doer, and I just can't even get up. So it's like, for sure, there is nothing. There's no energy, there's no drive, there's staring at the ceiling happening, and then suddenly, not suddenly, but like after a day maybe, it's just like unstoppable burst of energy, and it's finds its focus, and suddenly 20 things get done, and it's almost like I'm not doing those things, it's just getting done, da 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 da.
Mm-hmm.
And then again I go into this completely like, wow, finished. So what is this?
Okay, we have to be clear on what non-doership refers to, right? Because when you're lying in bed unable to function, unable to get jobs done, that has nothing to do with non-doership, as in the attitude of non-doership. The attitude of non-doership refers to a seeing of what is happening. Right? So it's that attitude of non-doership would see the person who is getting 20 jobs done in a day very efficiently, right? As the attitude of non-doership would see that as things happening, but no separate independent entity doing, as a result of their own volition, all of the things that get done. So non-doership doesn't have anything to do with the stopping of human function. It is an attitude towards the human function. It is an interpretation, meaning how is it interpreted? How is you getting 20 jobs done interpreted attitudinally? Is it interpreted as, oh, I am the doer getting these things done? Or is it interpreted as life happening through a body-mind instrument, happening in a certain way, and these jobs getting done? They're two very different attitudes. One is the attitude of non-doership towards the things that are happening, and the other is the attitude of personal doership towards the things that are happening. Right? And the same attitude of non-doership would see the person lying, on a bed, unable to do much, with no motivation to get things done. They'd see it the same way. You can either see it with the attitude of non-doership or an attitude of doership. The attitude of doership would be saying, you shouldn't be lying on the bed, you should be getting up and doing things. Right? This is irresponsible of you. All of that is the attitude of doership that is judging what is happening as you're doing. So you're the one that's doing the laziness, or you're the one that's doing the depression. The attitude of non-doership will see the laziness or depression as a happening according to God's will, a happening according to the genes and up-to-date conditioning of that person in that moment. So circumstance, doesn't matter what the circumstance is. The attitude of doership or the attitude of non-doership is what sees the circumstance, what interprets the circumstance as either my doing or a happening. So if you want an explanation of what is the movement of one day being wiped out and the other day being highly energized, you could describe it as a certain behavior of hyperactivity versus the day before the opposite of that.
It's not quite that. The day that I'm not doing is also the day that I'm doing mostly stuff inside the house.
Mm-hmm.
And I collect all the things that have to be done outside because it's just me doing everything in my life. So since there's no segregation, I keep all the active works which take me out for one day. But there are days when I need to get all that done and there's just no energy.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's just so much happening. So I'm wondering if that's really something. Is it just that I'm collecting all the outside works to be super efficient so that I don't need to get out 20 times? Just get out once, finish everything, come back in.
Yeah, but so the point here is to see whatever is happening
Yeah.
as a happening for what it is, not trying to improve what is happening, not try and make life more efficient.
It's like time management, energy management.
This isn't a time management workshop. There are time management workshops, and if you go to a time management workshop, it would be life delivering new conditioning, which could change your up-to-date conditioning, and then you might find yourself functioning differently. And that can be positive if that's what you feel needs to happen in life, where you manage your time and your energies differently. There's no reason why you can't go and get some training. That would be life delivering new conditioning that is focusing on self-improvement, right? And there's nothing at all wrong with that. In fact, if spirituality gets in the way of that, then that's a way of looking at spirituality that is actually becoming an obstacle to the practical daily living. But we also have to understand that as well as being interested in improving the flow of life, we need to recognize that my attitude to the flow of life is what determines my suffering or my peace of mind. Improving the flow of life is at best going to make life more pleasurable and less painful. And you're not going to, even if it does make life more pleasurable and less painful, it's not going to make life pleasure, 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 because inevitably, even once you've improved your time management skills, you're still going to get sick. People you love are still going to die. Someone is still going to crash into your car. You can't avoid these things. They're just part of the flow of life. So by all means, whenever we think there's something we can do to improve our biological way of relating in life, which, if someone gives you skills, time management skills, it's changing part of your biological conditioning. There's nothing wrong with that. But that's not going to make us more or less at peace. The being more or less at peace is dependent on how you see that, oh yes, in this moment, I have bad time management skills. In this moment, I have no energy to do anything. That's the fact. The attitude can either be of criticizing and resisting the fact that you have no energy, or it can be an attitude of relaxing into that being the case. And that's not an instruction to you to pick the better of the two attitudes. It's just a description of the two different attitudes that will be there, not according to you. So if you see the attitude arising that is judging the fact that you have no energy to do anything, or judging the fact that you're not managing your time correctly, then you can see that attitude as an arising, as a happening, and be uninvolved in it. If you can see that you keep getting dragged into trying to improve aspects of life that are sort of out of your control, like whether you have energy or not. And there are some things you can try taking supplements, you can try eating different foods, you can try exercising. But once you've tried that, if the situation persists, understand that the outcome is not in your control. So do what you can. The outcome will be either what you would like or not what you would like. So once you've done what you can, surrender to the fact that this is the way I am. And that becomes the attitude of non-doership. It's like, this is how life has shaped me. The alternative is to resist that attitudinally, to fight that.
It's so ingrained. So.
Yes, that's exactly right. So if you see the habit which is coming from the ingrainedness, the habit to judge yourself, to insist that you are different, and insist that the other is different, you might see, I keep trying to change circumstance because it's so ingrained. And seeing that can be the thing that reminds us the circumstance is not so important. The circumstance is pleasure or pain, and I'm not the one that is ultimately in control of that. And that then reminds us to take a lighter attitude towards your own imperfections and the imperfections of others. And they're only imperfections when they're relative to a certain benchmark. So you could say, okay, I'm not perfect when it comes to social interactions. I'm not perfect when it comes to driving. I'm not perfect when it comes to cooking. But then from a bigger picture you say, but that I don't need to be perfect according to those standards in order to be perfect as I am. Because perfect as you are is clearly, no one's going to be perfect on a biological performance basis. Perfect as you are means your attitude to who you are. If your attitude is, I am as I am. That's why in the story of Moses and the burning bush, right, when he asked the burning bush, which was a representation of God, who are you? The answer was, I am that I am. Because if God defined himself, if God answered by defining, as soon as that's the case, then it becomes a limitation. So if you say, I am good enough or I'm not good enough, you're then creating a limitation. Another attitude can say, well, I am that I am. No judgment of it.
So how can I believe it, that I am, and it's okay to be as I am?
You see,
how to believe it?
No, that's the problem. If you believe it, only if you just take it on as a mantra, I am that I am, I'm perfect, it just becomes a new belief system, a new, let's say, positive thinking. Right? That can be useful for a while. If we're convinced that we're not good enough, you can say, actually I am good enough. The fact is, we might be really crappy in some areas, meaning we might not be good enough in those areas, but that's not what's important, right? What's important is to see that, so how can you see that I am that I am means just look that you are what you are. You know, you do function the way you function. So it's not about a belief system, it's about coming to recognize, yes, I am this expression of life. Then it's not a belief system. So you can say, yes, start saying, yes, I have this personality and it has these good points. And it has these shortcomings. That's just seeing it for what it is. And then the attitude to that can be an attitude of allowing it to be as it is. It might not be what arises. You might find an attitude of not allowing the bad points that you've identified. Right? And then you can say, and that is part of what I am. The non-allowance of the bad points, and allow that to be. Doing some dynamic meditation can also be helpful.